Okay, we appear to be live. We are action. We are happening. I am Tad. It's much as I can come up with there. Anyway, good to see you. It is Sunday at 7 o'clock, and I will be here for the next hour reading from Happy Hour in Hell. First, I will probably give a brief update, although there's very little to update on right at the moment, because it's been a pretty boring week from a news point of view around the household. I mean, plenty happening out in the real world, so called, but not much happening around here, mostly because I've just been working all week, and Deborah has been working all week, and the dogs have been more or less behaving themselves all week. We've had a few moments, but basically they're inhabiting the same general area, staying on the property, not digging under the fences, which Johnny was doing a week before last when Lemon started to spend a lot of time in the yard with him. And for Lemon, spending time with Johnny means following him everywhere he goes with her nose up his rear end, or occasionally, in a fit of puppy excitement, leaping at him. Bound, bound, bounce, bounce, bound, bounce, bounce, and up into his face and expecting him to want to play, which, of course, as I was mentioning last night, Johnny's like me. You know, Johnny is old now. He doesn't want all this stuff. He doesn't want a new buddy who's constantly full of fun and excitement and wants to do things all the time. He just wants to be left alone to live his Eeyore-ish existence and thinking on the glories that are now lost to us, although that's just from Johnny's point of view, and things like that. So he's doing pretty well, though. He really doesn't respond to her aggressively. He just turns around and walks away, and then of course she immediately holsters her nozzle in his bottom, chasing after him, sniffing him, and he just kind of miserably saunters off. But after a while, I think she's starting to get the feeling that whatever else is going on, Johnny is not going to attack her, but he is also not going to play with her. So hopefully at a certain point she figures that out and continues to give him ever more space, and eventually things will be fine. But the fact that we can let them roam around now in the same space, we can just leave the screen doors open on the house with the dog doors in them, and they can both go in and out when they want to. All of this win, win, win. So we are very happy about that, especially because our daughter, who was watching them the last time we went on a trip back in May, they drove her mad because, of course, we were still in the keeping them separated phase, and that made things very difficult. So things should be a lot easier this time. They're certainly a lot easier on us. We keep talking about it. You know, it's like, oh my God, this is so great that we can just let them go in and out and don't have to be constantly on the alert as to where they are and whether they're about to have a fight or whatever. So we're in a good mood about that. As I mentioned, most of what I've been doing the last week is working on The Splintered Sun, trying to finish up the first draft in time to send it off to my publisher and various other readers before we leave for Denmark, which is fortunately not a long trip, but it is a trip where we'll be out of the country. So that has been going fairly well. I mean, I just try and work every day, and most of the time I achieve that. So that's what I've been doing. I've probably written 40 pages or so in the last 5-6 days. So that's about as much as I can expect to get, except for in certain deadline frenzies where I have written as much as 20 plus pages in a day. But that's only when I know exactly what's going to happen, and am mainly just sort of taking dictation from my own imagination for things that I've already figured out, and figure out how to translate those things into words. But that's a lot simpler. But a lot of times, most times when I'm writing, even though I do a lot of my thinking ahead of time, when I'm actually working, then I am having to do the sort of the set dressing, decide where they are and how that affects things. I have to decide what the actual physical activities are and how they're happening. If it's a fight scene, I have to kind of choreograph that in my mind. If it's a discussion, I have to figure out how they would have that conversation and how to keep it short rather than because the tendency with dialogue is once you get a rhythm going with two people arguing or whatever, it actually becomes, for me anyway, it feels like it becomes very easy to write that dialogue and to continue having those characters speaking in their own voices to each other. And if they're in opposition, it's even easier to draw it out and draw it out. But there's only a certain point to which you can do that, and then it becomes counterproductive. So that's another factor that's involved. So as I said, for most days writing, I'm actually having to figure out a lot of things as I go along, even though the broader strokes I have considered already and decided on before I sat down for the day. That's just my method. Everybody has different methods, and that's what works best for me. Anyway, before I start reading, because there's all kinds of stuff happening now since we're getting into the closing stretches of Happy Hour in Hell. I don't need that open. So let me double check and see who has popped in and has made a connection. And let me know that they're out there. But I have to find the correct page first and see what I got. Okay. So the folks who have checked in one shape or form by now, I see Kristen Rule. Hello, Kristen. Good to have you with us as always. Ray Weatherford. Hello, Ray. Same to you. Good to have you. Trish Laubacker. Hello, Trish. Medardo Landon Mazza Dueñas, El Señor. And I keep dropping my wife notes, Medardo. I will check in with her again this evening if she hasn't sent that off yet. So I am aware of them, and I did check in with her about it yesterday, and I will check in with her again tonight and try to put on a little gentle, loving pressure. Isaac, hello, glad to have you. As always, Tracy McClatchy, good to have you too. And Susan Shamblin, hello. And Emily, great to see you. Claudia, hello, hello. Welcome aboard. Christy Sanders, always a nice thing to see your name there. Mark J. Marino, nice to have you, Mark. I'm not sure we've had you on, or at least that I've had a comment from you before. And of course, my old crony, still probably regretting that phase of his life, Mark Craigbaum. And anyway, okay, so I think that's everybody who's checked in or who's left a message or a comment or something like that. And so I am not going to delve too deeply into what's already been commented on, although feel free to send me a comment or a question. I will try to check them as the reading goes on, but it's not easy. The Facebook system is a bit confusing and, to my mind, not really very intuitive, but that could just be me. But God knows I've had problems with it in the past. And they did just change things around again, although I figured those out before the first time I had to deal with the new layout of the producer's page, or whatever you call it. I think that's what it's called. The person who's putting together the broadcast or the live video, which is, of course, me. Pretty much everything. We do have, as I have mentioned many times, we have assistance from some very fine people who help us pretty much all the time with Austin stuff. I have some very dedicated, very smart readers who know the material as well or better than I do, and who I especially found to be a godsend during the writing of The Witchwood Crown and its successors, because I hadn't read the books for decades at that point, or hadn't done anything much with the books for decades. And so I had to have a resource of people who knew and could tell me, no, Tad, you can't do that, or that kind of conflicts with the canon you established, but yeah, that kind of stuff. They've been very helpful. And we had some of them, and plus some other good friends too, help us when we did the merchandise. And if we do another merchandise, there will be help there too. And there have been other things we've had plenty of help from. We've had help with our website, which I think is down at the moment, and we have to get that fixed, and various other things. So in no way is what I'm about to say suggesting that we are alone and adrift in a pitiless universe or anything like that. But most of the business of being writers and being in the business that Deb and I have is Deb's and mine to do. We have always managed to make a living off of what I do and what Deborah does, and we have always, at worst, scraped by, and at best, lived far higher than we should have. But basically, we had an assistant for a while, but that was mostly a household domestic assistant who had transitioned from being the nanny for the kids when they were young. But we haven't had that for years. So it's mostly just the two of us now for most things. And that's one of the reasons why, to my great shame, I have just hardly ever answer mail anymore. You know, when people drop me emails or send me messages on Facebook, or Deb passes along things that she gets on Twitter or whatever. I refuse to call it by the new name. It just, you know, I can't do that and be a normal dad and homeowner and dog dad and write, at least not sufficiently to keep up with any kind of deadline schedule, and also do all the secretarial work that it would require to answer all the connections, queries, and just kind emails and things that people send us. So, just explaining, whenever we talk about, you know, well, we have to do this, we have to send this, it's just the two of us. Two fairly decent, very clean old people. He's a clean old man, as they say several times in Hard Day's Night. He's a clean old man. Yeah, very clean. So that's basically it. That's all I really have to announce. I'm cranking away at the last stretches of Splintered Sun. I am now, you know, back to writing original material after I spent a couple of months doing rewrites of the early part of the book and fixing up some things that I had come to realize were not the way I wanted it to work. And that's it at the moment. That is it. So rather than waste all night talking after I've already admitted that I don't have much to talk about, I will get on with reading, because this is a fairly entertaining, and in my biased opinion, this is a fairly entertaining part of the book. So let us get on with it. And we are... Oh, let me quickly give you a précis of what happened last time. Bobby managed to... Bobby was being held prisoner by Eligor and tortured and tortured and tortured. And finally, Eligor said, you know, I don't know what to do with you. And Bobby said, let me go. I will get you the feather. You let me and Kaz go, and I will give you back the feather. I have no desire to keep it, but you have to let me go and let her go and promise that you won't follow us or attack us again or whatever. And Eligor said, basically, no, I'm going to let you go, and I'm going to hang on to her, and when you give it to me, then you'll get her. And he brought her out, bound and gagged, and said, here she is. If you do what you say, I will let her go. I will give her to you, and that's that. And essentially he said, I am not allowed to make promises that I don't keep, which of course Bobby doesn't trust, but you know, he's in a situation. Smiler also visited him while Bobby was in a kind of a between state, and Bobby finally realized that Smiler had nothing to do with Eligor, that Smiler had been sent after him by the angel Kephis, the one who started Sam's Third Way program, and she or it or whatever it is, it had told him that told Smiler, the resurrected ex-serial killer, had told Smiler that Bobby was pretending to be an angel but was really a demon. And Smiler, it turns out, is obsessed with making presents for heaven by making people into angels, which was why he was a murderer. And he then, when Bobby tells him that, the truth, he understands that there's something going on. He saw Bobby saving Gob and was puzzled by that. But he also isn't quite sure what it all means, and so Smiler disappears. Then Eligor releases Bobby after having a weird little crab-like thing surgically implanted into the back of his head to make sure that Bobby doesn't just escape hell and never do what he promised he'd do. so that Elagor can know where he is at any given moment. Bobby, of course, doesn't like that, but he doesn't have much choice. And then Elagor reveals that Prince Sitri and the Murderers sect and many other high muckamucks in hell have found out that Elagor snatched him out of the arrest, and they are coming for Bobby. And Elagor basically goes, so, if you're going to get away, good luck. You'll have to get out of hell on your own, though. I'm not doing anything to help you. And Bobby reappears outside Elagor's house, castle, mansion, whatever you want to call it, and makes his way down to the harbor, and with much lack of luck. But he does get through, and he gets onto the boat, and Riprash casts off, and they are on their way back to Abaddon and back to presumably Bobby's escape over the Neronian bridge. And that's where we were. And I know that's a lot of information, but it's all important and useful and will come up in the next few chapters. So, continuing to read from Happy Hour in Hell. Over what must have been the next couple of days, we raced along the pitchy Styx, past countless disgusting harbors. Riprash wasn't worried about hiding me from the crew now, since nobody was going ashore, and soon I was spending hours at the ship's rail, watching the coastal towns of hell slide by. "You see, I've been thinking about all this," Riprash explained to me one night. "It comes to me that maybe it's time I should be doing something else." I was a bit surprised. Something else? Like what? "Bringing the lifter's word to more than just the few," Riprash said, looking as philosophical as a monstrous giant with a split skull is able to look. "Ever since you brought me that word from you-know-where, I only half believed Donkey Smile told me a real story until now, you see, so I never really got up off my haunches to do what I know is right." I shook my head in confusion. Riprash explained that a long time before, when he had first worked for Gagsnatch, a demon named Donkey Smile had been thrown from another ship, and Riprash rescued him. He found the newcomer to be surprisingly intelligent, good company on the long voyage. Eventually, the newcomer had confessed that he came from somewhere else, in other words, outside of hell, and passed along the gospel of the lifters to Riprash. Riprash had been alive so long that he had become, as he put it, a mite philosophical in my age, and what the stranger said touched a chord inside him. I was darkly amused by Donkey Smile. If that was what Temuel had chosen to call himself in hell, then the Mule, our nickname for him at the Compasses, had been pretty much right on the money after all. But what had Archangel Temuel been doing in hell in the first place? Another question that led me nowhere useful. "But these days, since you came and gave me his words," Riprash continued, "I'm thinking that there's more for me to do than to just live on like nothing's changed. I'm wondering if you coming with Donkey Smile's message, if that's like a sign, you see? A sign for me that it's time to do different. To take the lifter's message all around to those who've never heard it." If Riprash really planned on becoming a missionary in this, the least missionary-friendly place I could imagine, I was glad he and I were going to be parting company pretty soon, probably as soon as we reached Cocytus Landing. I felt bad that I had dropped little Gob in all this, but I told himself the life he'd had in the filth of Abaddon wouldn't be anything he'd miss much. I also kept running into Riprash's strange little employee, the one I had privately named Crazy Cat. He was some kind of bookkeeper, which brought him frequently into Riprash's presence, and yet every time he saw me, he goggled like he had the first time, although he always stopped when he saw that I'd noticed. It was beginning to annoy me, and, to be honest, to worry me a little. I asked Riprash where the little cat-like fellow had come from. "Wart? I don't think he'd been with me for a season before you showed up. He just walked up to Gagsnatch one day, said he'd heard we needed a body could do sums. As it happened, we did, and
He's been with us since. Quiet. And he does seem a bit fixed on you, but other than that, I've had no trouble from him. I'll make him come and tell you what's what.
I'm not sure, I began, but Rip Rash had already sent Gob to fetch him.
Now,
said Rip Rash, when Gob had returned with a little accountant creature,
why do you want to be plaguing Snakestaff here with your nonsense, Wart?
The little fellow looked up in abject terror. He gave a single squeak, but otherwise couldn't summon any useful noises. Out of pity, I convinced Rip Rash to let me take over the interrogation. You're not in trouble, I said as reassuringly as I could. It's just that I want to know why you're always looking at me the way you do. Now he wouldn't look at me at all. Don't know. Well, think about it. Nobody's going to hurt you.
Lest he tells a lie, growled Rip Rash, 'cause then I'll have his head right off and eat it.
Which probably wasn't as helpful as the ogre had intended it to be. A good length of time passed before Wart could be roused from his faint, and then it still took a while before his teeth stopped chattering so he could speak. Don't know, he told me in a tinny little murmur. Just something about you, your face. Not those things, he said, pointing at the bumps I'd added after Vera's house to disguise myself. Saw it first time. Feels like I know you. Seen you, anyway. But no matter what else I asked him, he couldn't clear up the mystery. Like a lot of the residents of Hell, little Wart didn't really remember much about the previous week, let alone the details of his earlier life in Hell. I examined the little demon carefully. He was unexceptional in appearance, at least by hellish standards, somewhere between an alley cat dipped in motor oil and a very ugly lawn gnome. But now that I was really looking hard, there was something about him. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it nevertheless plucked at my memory. Had I seen him in one of my earliest moments in Hell? If so, his features were so ordinary by local standards, I couldn't believe I'd spent more than a moment looking at him. And if my memory was that good, I should have been out of Hell and cleaning up on Jeopardy.
Right, Wart, you can go,
Rip Rash told him at last.
If you think of anything, come tell me. But not in front of anyone but these two, he said, indicating Gob and me. Too many years.
Wart nodded slowly. Too many years, he said, but the phrase seemed to have caught his attention, and he repeated it as if hearing it for the first time. Too many ears. The little creature turned to gape at me. I think it came to him, just as it came to me. Walter? I said. Walter Sanders? Is that you? What are you doing here? And it was him. I could see it now through all that weird. Walter Sanders, my angel buddy from back at the Compasses, stabbed by Smiler and missing ever since. Was I hallucinating? Had I been in Hell so long my mind was crumbling? But the little bookkeeper wore an expression that must have been a mirror of mine. The slow dawning, the unlikely facts caught in the bottleneck of logic and unable to slide past. Yes, he said, his words barely audible. Yes, Walter Sanders. No, Vatriel. That's my real name. He looked around the cabin, then looked over Rip Rash, Gob, and me, blinking as he did so like a slow loris caught in a flashlight beam. What am I doing here? You don't know? Fat lot of good any of this was going to do me. Just more mysteries on top of the ones I already had and didn't want. You don't remember? He was shaking his shaggy head when a crewman rapped on the cabin door, urging Rip Rash to come to the quarterdeck. Walter and I were no closer to solving what had happened to him between his being stabbed by Smiler and taking a job with Gag Snatch's quality slaves when Rip Rash shoved open the cabin door. Trouble, the ogre said. Come up. I I'd scarcely ever seen him look worried, but now he really did, the great shelf of his brow frowning until his eyes were almost invisible. Gob and I, and Wart, a.k.a. Vatriel, a.k.a. Walter, followed him up onto the deck. The shape on the horizon was so small and its light so faint that it took me a long moment to realize it was a ship.
"What's the ensign?" Riprash asked Gob. "Use those young eyes."
Gob climbed up so he could lean out over the rail, then spent a half-minute squinting into the foggy darkness. "Bird's foot," he said as he scrambled back down to the ogre's side.
"Feared that," said Riprash. "That's the sign of the Commissar of Wings and Claws. It's Nilok's ship, the Headless Widow."
I was frightened, but didn't want to show it. Charming name.
Whole thing is raping the Headless Widow, but that's too long for most folks, 'cause they don't want to talk about that ship much anyway. She runs on steam. She's got something like 20 guns to our 8, and only 2 of ours work. And she'll catch us by tomorrow or the next day, certain.
I could see Nilok's ship a little better now. A dark shadow hunkered low in the Stygian waters, its lanterns peering at us like eyes in the fog. I had hoped I'd burned the ugly, rattling bastard to ashes when I blew up his Gravejaw house, but hellish nobility are extremely hard to kill. And, as I think I've mentioned, they're also very serious about holding grudges. Apparently, the Commissar had managed to get himself appointed to head up the bobby hunt.
"Can we fight them?" "If by fight you mean get cut to pieces, burned and sunk, then yes, we'll put up a fine fight." Well, I always suspected I'd wind up at the bottom of the Styx someday."
As if to underscore this cheery thought, the wind changed direction and our sails sagged. As I stared out across the dark expanse of river, I could hear the hungry rumble of the Headless Widow's engines. Chapter 37. Walking on Water. Here's a little rule about warfare at sea. Avoid it. Here's a corollary pertaining to warfare against a ship full of angry demons on a mythical river inhabited by monsters, and with no better hope, even if you win, than fighting your way across the rest of hell afterward on the off chance that you might find your way out again. At which point your angry angelic bosses, or any number of other interested parties, will get on with the job of ripping your soul out of your body and sending it right back to hell again. Avoid that even more strenuously. But there I was, standing at the bitch's rail, watching just such a demonic ship bearing down on us as it had been doing for hours. In ordinary circumstances, we'd have been all right because we had the current with us and our ship was small and fast. Slavers had to be, not because slavery was illegal in hell, not bloody likely, but because slaves were valuable cargo that other ships were only too happy to steal. But, according to Riprash, Nilok's ship was powered by 4 huge steam engines, so even if we could get through Styx Lock ahead of them, they would gain on us even faster when we reached the thicker, more resistant waters of the Phlegethon. If we ran all night, Riprash said, risking going onto a rock and only the highest knew what else, and we managed to stay ahead of Nilok, we'd probably reach the lock in the earliest hours of the morning. But after that, it would only be a matter of time before he overtook us. Riprash and his crew were busy keeping us alive until then, coaxing every bit of speed out of the old slaver's tub, but I had nothing to do but walk back and forth on the deck, nursing a growing sense of disaster. In less fucked up circumstances, it would have been interesting to watch the crew working together to keep the bitch running ahead of our enemies. Many of them had the ape-like look of Gob, which stood them in good stead as they swung through the shrouds even more nimbly than the most experienced human sailors. Others, less suited for climbing, looked as though they'd be most useful when it came time to fight. especially a pair of brothers named Wretch and Rawny, who had razor-sharp talons on hands and feet and were covered all over with spiny plates. Still, if the enemy caught us, even those two were going to find it hard to do much more than outlive us by a few moments. The headless widow was closer now, and even in the dim red light reflected from hell's awesome ceiling, the only glow on this stretch of the oily river, it was plain that their ship was far larger than ours, and their crew far more numerous. It was my fault that Nylock was bearing down on the bitch. My fault that when he'd caught up, he'd sink Riprash's ship and take the survivors into slavery. It was up to me to help save them, or all this hopefulness about redemption was just noise. Then, as I paced, I suddenly remembered what Riprash had said about throwing the owner of the pistols I was wearing overboard, and that gave me an idea. A crazy, hopeless one, but I wasn't in a position to be picky. So I went to ask Walter about supplies we might have on board. I found my former co-worker standing at the starboard rail, watching the widow's light slowly grow closer. "Riprash says Nylock's the worst kind of demon," said Walter quietly. "There's a kind that's worse than the others?" "He said Nylock's the sort who wants to make a name for himself, but he's basically mediocre. That's my word, not Riprash's. He said useless. He says it's the ambitious, stupid ones who make the most trouble." "Not just here, either," I said, thinking of Kephas. Still can't remember anything about what happened?" Walker shrugged. He didn't meet my eye. "Sorry. I do know you, though, Bobby. It took me a while, but I remember you now. I think you treated me square." "We were friends," I told him. "That's how I always saw it. Do you remember anything else? The compasses?" He rubbed his wrinkled little face. "Not really. I mean, I know it was a place and that I used to go there. I sort of remember it was a place where people laughed and sang. Not so much singing as putting money in the jukebox and shouting along," I said. "But yeah, more or less. I think I remember heaven, too." He spoke slowly, as if wanting to be certain of what he said. "At least that's what it seems like. Beautiful, bright light. Someone talking to me. A sweet, sweet voice." "Yeah, that sounds like heaven, but you can't remember anything else?" "No." He was frustrated, almost tearful. "No, but it's important. I know it's important." I felt like his pain was my fault, too, but it had to be better for him to know he didn't belong in hell, didn't it? It wouldn't have been kind to leave him in ignorance. That's what I tell myself, anyway. "Well, if you think of anything, let me know, because something is definitely weird. You were attacked by the guy they sent after me. Then you just never came back. I expected they'd put you in a new body." I broke off, having noticed something happening on the horizon, where the headless widow had grown taller as it approached, so that it now looked almost like Gravejaw House itself had taken to the river. "Is Nylock's ship on fire?" I stared, positive that I was seeing things. Certainly it was too convenient otherwise for our enemy simply to catch fire. "Riprash!" I shouted. "Come here!" When the ogre arrived, the cloud of smoke and fire around the widow had spread out a good way on either side, and I truly began to believe that fate might have saved me from an extremely unpleasant end to my infernal vacation. "It's fire, right? It's burning." Riprash didn't look like someone ready to celebrate.
"It's fire, right enough, but it's not their boat burning. Fact, whatever it is, it's coming toward us."
"What? Is it a gun? Did they fire something at us?" I never got an answer, at least not from Riprash, because the dark cloud full of fire was growing so fast that I couldn't see Nyloc's ship anymore. A moment later, something shot over our heads, flaming like a tracer bullet. It hit the deck, bounced once in a shower of sparks, then smacked into the far gunwale. A nearby sailor threw a bucket of black Styx water on it. "What is it?" asked Walter. But a moment later, a dozen more whipped past us, and we could see that they were birds, gray and plump and fast, and every single one of them on fire. A couple struck the mizzen sail and started the fabric smoldering. A pair of simian deckhands scrambled up the lines to put it out, but even as they climbed, several more birds struck the mizzen and the topsail. Another winged blaze came hurtling over the water toward us, bobbing crazily, and smacked right into Gob, catching in his hair and setting it alight. Riprash roared and grabbed the boy, then leaned out over the rail, stretching his huge arm to dunk the boy in the river and extinguish the flames.
"Nyloc's doing. He's the commissar of wings and claws,"
Riprash shouted as he dropped, soaking Gob to the deck. More birds flew past as if shot out of a gun, trailing flames, trying to fly even as their wings burned away.
"Man the buckets, every hell jack of you," Riprash bellowed. "They're trying to set the sails alight, and if the sails burn, they'll catch us before the next glass. Pass those buckets. Keep the water coming."
I joined the madness, taking my place in a line, passing sloshing pails of stinking Styx water from the bilge up to the masts. The best climbers were kept busy putting out the fires wherever the hell pigeons struck, but even so, the mizzen sail was gone and the topsail almost entirely aflame, and only heroic work by the crew kept it from spreading to the other sails. The flock finally thinned, but without the topsail, we were losing ground even more swiftly. I squatted down on the deck beside Walter and struggled to catch my breath before the next wave of flaming birds. Something pale flew past me, rattling. Another pale shape struck the mainmast behind us and fell to the deck, thrashing and snapping. It was a flying fish, or at least part of one, an almost fleshless skeleton. But the fact that it was mostly bones and empty eye sockets didn't keep it from trying to sink its teeth into everything it could reach before it died. Several more flew past, then suddenly a whole flock, or school, or whatever you call it, seemed to tumble down on us. Several of the crew putting out fires were knocked out of the rigging as if they'd been hit by bullets. They fell to the deck. I could hear bones breaking, so I grabbed Walter and dragged him back toward Riprash's cabin. Gob was already there, hunkered down in the doorway, watching with wide eyes as the swarm of mummified fish smacked into the sails and deck. Then, from out of the distance, I heard the Headless Widow's cannons fire, a deep roar like sequenced thunder. They were still too far away to reach us, but it was an announcement of sorts. The end was coming, whether sooner or later.
"I have an idea."
I have an idea, I shouted to Gob and Walter over the yelling and screaming of the crew, many of whom were barely clinging to the ropes overhead as they dodged the toothy horrors. I asked Gob, "Can you sew?" He looked at me as if I'd asked an earthly teenager if the Macarena was still hip. "No? Then find me someone who can. Walter, help me find some of these oilskins that are the right size." "Well, what are you doing?" Walter asked as Gob sped off across the snapping, fishy chaos of the deck. "They don't want the rest of you. They want me. As long as I'm on this ship, they're going to keep coming. But if I'm off it, well, I think they'll follow me instead." He looked at the pile of skins collecting beside me. "What, are you going to make a life raft? They'd catch up with you in an hour." "No, I'm not going to make a life raft. I'm going to try a little trick. I don't know how much you remember yet about your old life, but on Earth they used to be impressed by someone walking on water." He stared at me in puzzlement. "You're going to walk on water?" "Better than that. I'm going to walk under the water." A few moments later, Gob returned with what looked like one of the oldest members of the crew, a sailor named Ballcramp, whose hell body seemed to be formed from the least attractive elements of the concepts spider and beef jerky. The worthy fellow clearly thought I was insane when I told him what I wanted, but he saw the benefits of working in the captain's cabin, out of the murderous rain of fish. He arranged himself on the floor and took out a sewing kit wrapped in hide, with needles made of bone and thread made of gut. I explained what I wanted and left him stitching oilcloths together under the supervision of Walter and Gob, while I hurried across the deck with my arms over my head against the continuing flurries of animated fish bones. Riprash was down on the gun deck trying to get the 2 workable cannons into firing position near the stern. I told him my plan. Being a demon, Riprash didn't waste any time arguing with me, even though it wasn't very likely I'd survive. It was occasionally almost refreshing how few social niceties there were in hell, how little time was spent pretending to care about things that nobody really cared about. Riprash had nothing against me, but he loved the bitch, and he probably also thought that I'd just be recycled somehow if my body died. I didn't bother to explain that dying would just be the fastest possible way to deliver myself into the hands of Nylok and the rest of Hell's demon lords. Lame's instructions had made it very clear. Temuel's arrangements could only get me back into my old body once he'd managed to extract me, and he could only extract me from one particular place, the far side of Nero's forgotten bridge. So, if it works, Nylok and his men should leave you alone, I finished. Can't promise, but if they have to choose, I think they'll choose me.
You'll never make it, Riprash said. There are necks and black sinkers and a shit swarm of big fang jellies in this part of the river. Any one of them will swallow you like a pickled eyeball.
I didn't even want to be swallowed like a regular eyeball. Can you get me closer to the shore?
Not here. Can't lose the current or they'll be on us. But in a little while, we'll be past Bash Skull Point where the Styx meets up with the Phlegathon at the edge of the Bay of Tophet. Water shallower. Won't be any fang jellies. Might be some hog squid, but they're not as bad. You know about them, right?
Excuse me. To be honest, I didn't really want to know about hog squid or fang jellies or any of them. Everything already sucked so completely that some new bad information would have just pushed my situation past its current state of zen-like perfect fuckery into something messy and overdone. The Headless Widow was gaining on us, and when they fired their guns, the white waterspouts of falling shells were now only a few hundred yards behind us. I stopped on the way back to Riprash's cabin and picked up a cannonball of my own to carry off, adding the gunnery sergeant to the list of hell denizens who thought I was crazy. I thumped the heavy iron ball down in a corner of the cabin and did my best to make it secure against the pitch of the ship. It was big enough to break bones if it started rolling. Then I went back to directing old Ball Cramp. "Leave a hole here at the corner," I told the spindly creature. He shook his shriveled head at this senseless order, but the undead flying fish were cracking against the outside of the cabin, and it was a lot nicer inside, so he said nothing. "You're both safer with Riprash," I told Walter and Little Gob as I strapped myself into the crude oilskin vest I'd had Ball Cramp make. Puffed up with the air I'd just blown into it, it made me look a bit like the Michelin Man, but less svelte. A fair wind, one of the few bits of luck I'd had in this whole cursed trip, had kept us ahead of Nylok long enough to reach Bash Skull Point, and I was determined to get off the nagging bitch before the commissar destroyed it. "But they know this ship," Walter said. "They know Gag Snatch's stall, everything. We'll never be able to go back to Cocytus Landing now."
"Don't matter," said Riprash as he lifted me into the dinghy. "We're not going back."
"What do you mean?" As we talked, I hurriedly tested the oilcloth of the vest to see if it was flexible enough, but my main concern was that the seams would give under the pressure. I didn't have a huge amount of faith in the tar we'd used to seal them.
"It's a sign, that's all," said Riprash. "Like I told you, I've been thinking on this, and I see it clear now. I'm to take the nagging bitch and spread the lifter's words. We'll go where we please, and every port will be our home.
This sounded like a spectacularly bad idea. The authorities, Eligor and Nylock and Prince Citri and the rest, they'll stamp on you like ants, Riprash. They'll never let you get away with it.
Even the Mastema can't be everywhere, he said, surprisingly cheerful. We'll stop and spread the word and move on. We'll leave behind those as can keep spreading the word for us. Gob here can say the lifter's prayer by heart already. Say it, boy. Show him.
The kid looked embarrassed or fearful, but he stared at the deck and spoke in a quiet, very serious voice. Out farther, way up in heaven, hell has took my name. The kind don't come, the will won't come in hell as it does in heaven. Give us this day our asphodel, and give us our best passes, as we give up on those who passes against us. And lead us not into time's tortures, but deliver us from our evil. Again, the lack of tear ducts kept me from making a blubbering fool out of myself. I still wasn't sure whether I'd helped the boy or doomed him by bringing him up out of Abaddon, but it was too late to change anything now. Keep safe, Gob. Riprash will take good care of you. The boy nodded. I don't know whether he would have thanked me in any case, but people didn't do much thanking in hell, as you may have noticed. And we were also surrounded by gouts of white water as Nylock's guns began to find our range, so things were a bit hectic. And, Walter, I'll get you out of here, somehow. I felt like an idiot, even as I said it. So many promises, so few fulfilled. But Walter was too polite, even as a demon, to tell me how unlikely that was. Instead, he just waved, like a kid watching his older brother going to the gallows. Riprash began lowering the dinghy into the water, manning the ropes all by himself.
I put a flask of rum in that vest of yours, Snake Staff. You'll need it, I think. And tell you-know-who back in the you-know-where that I'll spread the word all over the inferno.
Was that really what Temuel wanted? It didn't matter because that was what he was going to get. We never know what a gesture or a word will lead to, do we? God loves you, I called. It was what we angels say to the recently deceased. I was pretty sure none of these folks had heard it since then, and some of them, like Riprash, had probably never heard it at all. Bobby! Walter leaned over the rail and would have fallen when a cannonball landed close enough to rock the ship, but Gob caught at his legs and kept him from tumbling. I just thought of something. The voice. I remember the voice.
What voice?
I could barely hear him over the wind and the barking of the headless widow's guns. The voice that asked me about you. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not sure either, but I think it's important. It was a child's voice, a sweet child's voice. My boat splashed hard into the water, and for the next moments I was busy trying not to fall into the river. The waves, beaten up by the wind, had seemed much smaller from on board the bitch than in the little dinghy. I could hear Riprash bellowing for the rowers to start pulling, and the slave ship began to move away from me. I think the sight of my boat being put into the water had confused Nylock and his crew. The widow's guns fell silent, though the black bulk of the ship continued to bear down on me. I'm sure the commissar and his crew expected me to start rowing, but in fact I hadn't bothered to bring any oars. No point to it, as you'll see. I watched nagging bitch pull away, and for the first time I felt how alone, how truly alone I was. Nylock and his crew obviously suspected some kind of bomb or other trap, so when they were 30 or 40 yards away from me, they disengaged their engines and let the ship drift with the same current pushing my little boat. Many sailors and soldiers looked down through the clouds of steam that drifted from the widow's smokestacks. Seen this close, Nylok looked even less pleasant than I remembered. A lot of his bone tendrils had simply burned away or broken off, and for the first time I could see that his skeletal head was more like a bird's than a horse's. "You!" he screeched. "Snake staff, you miserable turdling! Why do you look so puffed up? Whatever armor you're wearing under that won't save you from me. You destroyed my home." "Gosh," I called back, "maybe because you were going to torture me and then turn me over to your superiors?" "Nobody may flout authority," Nylok screeched. "Least of all a speck of dirt like you. A creature with no level, no land, no loyalty." "Honestly, I'm not listening," I said. "You're as boring as you are ugly." I looked around to make sure that Nagging Bitch was still on the move, that Riprash and the rest were putting distance between themselves and Nylok's larger ship. Then I bent down and picked up the heavy iron sphere from the bottom of the dinghy. "Do you know what this is?" I asked. Nylok tittered in surprise. "A cannonball." "Wrong. Try again." He scowled, a strange thing to see on such a long, bony face. "A bomb? A bomb? Go ahead, little traitor. Destroy yourself. You won't hurt us. This ship is iron-plated." "It's not a bomb either. It's just a weight." I balanced for a moment with my foot on the boat's rail, just until I could tuck the heavy iron ball into the harness I wore across my belly. Then I stepped off the boat, and the cannonball yanked me down into the oily, caustic waters of the Phlegethon. Chapter 38. Chained. I'm sure I would have had to pay extra on any package tour of hell for the thrill of sinking to the bottom of the Phlegethon River, swim with the friendly fang jellies. But to be honest, I was more intent on surviving than getting the most out of the experience. Actually, surviving probably was getting the most out of the experience. I spent the first few seconds pulling the bone cork out of the air sac on my vest, then getting the opening into my mouth so I could breathe. Shallowly, of course. The air inside had to last until I could reach land, which also meant I had to outlast any pursuit from the widow. I looked up. The eyes of my demon body were very adaptable to low light, and luckily the Phlegethon wasn't as dark as the Styx. Even so, I could barely make out the hull of Nylok's ship far above me in a circle of sky. I could see all right, but the Phlegethon wasn't always bursting into flame by accident. Its waters made my eyes sting and irritated my nose something fierce. Still, so far, so good. The cannonball was heavy enough to keep me on the bottom, despite the buoyancy of the oilskin air sac. Things swam past me in the murk. Some of them quite depressingly solid, serpentine forms like huge eels or something fished out of Loch Ness, but others that were scarcely more than dark streaks in the water, cold currents with a definable shape. I didn't see any of Riprash's fang jellies close up, but I saw something large in the distance that looked like a floating circus tent trying to fold and unfold itself as it floated along. I didn't waste much time thinking about it or any of the others, because it seemed obvious to me that the bottom of a river in hell wasn't likely to be a safe place. The only thing I could do to improve my odds was to get to land as soon as possible. As elsewhere in hell, the animal life was as distorted and depressing as the more complex creatures. As I reached the bottom and began to trudge slowly across the mud in what I believed was the general direction of shore, and if I was wrong, I was going to be in serious trouble, I found myself stepping carefully around spiny things that could have been sea urchins if they hadn't been in a river and 5 feet wide. Flat, disc-like crabs with disturbingly human faces skittered in and out of the rocks on the bottom, sending up little puffs of silt as they dodged away from predators that were little more than toothy jaws with fins. Once I stopped, despite my limited amount of air, and waited while a vast shadow passed right over me with a slow flick of its tail. I couldn't see it clearly, but it was covered in bony plates and had a mouth big enough to swallow Bobby Dollar and a few other folk at the same time. I had no illusions that I'd be able to outswim or outfight it. The thing was the size of a school bus, so I just hunkered down. It was a long wait, but at last the living submarine moved on and I could continue. Later, I think I even saw a hog squid, which truly did look a bit like my friend Fatback in his pig form, if Fatback was as big as the payload of a tanker truck and had 20-foot tentacles growing out of his mouth. Fortunately, the ugly bastard was too busy rooting up and swallowing doomed creatures from the murky river bottom to notice me. It was hard to hold myself to small breaths, hard to walk slowly when there were monsters all around, and I could feel the air sac getting smaller and smaller, but I had no idea how long it would take me to reach the shore, or whether it would even be safe at that point to get out of the water. I was pretty certain Nylock would be watching for me to surface. He might even be waiting when I reached the riverbank, since it didn't take a whole lot of smarts, even by the standards of infernal nobility, to realize what I was trying to do. I had just kicked away a few larger specimens of the crabs with faces. The bigger ones looked both less human and more expressive, if you can imagine that, and was really beginning to wonder whether I had enough air to make the shore when I saw another long, large shape coming out of the murk in my general direction. Certain that it was another of those plated monsters, or something even worse, I crouched down in the mud and froze in place, trying not to let the bubble of air in my lungs escape and give me away. But what came toward me, out of the clouds of silt, heading out toward the deepest part of the river, was not the prehistoric monster I expected, but a parade. Humanoid shapes walked along the river bottom in a line, kicking up the gray ooze so that they seemed to be moving in a fog, like a vision of fairies in the Irish hills. Then I saw that they were walking along the bottom because they were chained together. Slaves. Somebody's slave ship had been chased by a faster ship, or perhaps merely sunk. Whichever it had been, these poor damned souls had wound up at the bottom of the Phlegethon, too heavy because of their chains to reach the surface. I could only guess how long they had been down here, trudging through the mud, but it had been long enough for the river to take its toll. Several of the slaves were all but gone, only bones and a few rags of skin still tangled in their chains, but many of the others looked almost whole, except for the places where fish and other river creatures had gnawed them. The leader, whose grim determination seemed to have drawn the rest along after him, had lost both eyes, one arm, and most of the fingers from his remaining hand, but still he moved forward through the dark water, one bony, tattered foot in front of another, his fellows stumbling or floating behind him, depending on how much of them remained. When I saw all those empty eye sockets, I understood why the poor bastards were headed in the opposite direction from the shore. I moved toward them as quickly as I could through the slippery ooze, trying to get their attention by waving my arms, but my cannonball sinker made me no faster than them, and even though I got closer, I couldn't attract the attention of any of them, least of all the blind leader. He marched past me, and the rest of the chained, doomed group followed him. I got close enough to grab at one of them, but the arm came away in my hand, and the one who had lost it didn't even seem to notice. Too far gone, I realized. However long they had been down here, there was not enough left of them, either in body or in thought, to survive on the surface. The kindest thing I could do was leave them marching on as they were, to be pulled apart by fish, or to rot gently into pieces and become one with the river. One of the most profound lessons of hell was how little an angel could actually accomplish. I had learned that lesson again and again since I'd been here, but never as clearly as this. The chained slaves hobbled slowly away, vanishing within moments into the floating murk of the river bottom, invisible to my stinging eyes. And that, my friends, is where we are stopping until next week. So that is it. It is now 8 o'clock. You have been read at, and I have been redded. No, I have read dead. Anyway, I have redded some stuff, and you have been redded at. And that's basically the bargain here. So I feel that I now can go eat some dinner. So with that, I thank you very much for your presence, as always. It is highly, highly appreciated. And I urge you strongly to come back and join me for the next reading, where things continue to be fast and furious, so to speak. And I will, as I said, see you then. I will be back next weekend, as far as I know. No issues that I know of. So take good care of yourself. That is the first imprimatur. You must take good care of yourself or you can't help anybody else. Then take good care of your friends and loved ones, all the special people, and keep an eye out for those who you may not know so well, but who still could use a kind word, a smile. You'd be surprised sometimes what a difference it can make. Just a cheerful greeting, friendly conversation in the pharmacy, that kind of thing. We all do better when we are reminded that we are part of a social species, at least reminded in a nice way that we are part of a social species. So with that, I say again, thanks, peace, be well, and I will see you very soon. Ciao, bambini.